Nebraska claims 5 national titles in football. They could potentially claim more, but for most Cornhusker fans, the history of Nebraska football doesn't begin until the arrival of Bob Devaney in 1962. That's really too bad because Nebraska has a very rich history of football. A good example is the 1902 Nebraska team coached by Bummy Booth that was undefeated and unscored upon. Then there's the 1915 team that was undefeated and was one of the best teams in the nation that year. Nebraska has never claimed a national title for 1915, and I'm going to offer you a discussion or a debate as to whether or not they should. That's the subject of this video. Should Nebraska claim 1915 as a national title in college football? I'm Jon Johnston, and this is Hardcore College Football History. Before we start talking about Nebraska's 1915 team, we need to understand where college football was in 1915. College football had started in 1869 in the Northeast between Rutgers and Princeton, and for the decades that followed, the power structure and the best teams in football were from the Northeast. Let's say from around 1890 to about perhaps 1915, the game was heavily controlled by the Big Three: Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. 4 if you add Penn. From 1870 to 1900, those 4 teams are credited by the NCAA with nearly all the national titles. Yale and Harvard claimed 30 national titles between them, the vast majority coming before 1914. The people who decided who won championships were amongst the power structure of the Northeast. Yale's Walter Camp, the father of American football, chose the All-American teams. The different rules committees that evolved throughout that era that controlled the game were largely made up of people from the Northeast. In order to gain a reputation, you had to play and beat those teams, or beat a team the rules committee recognized as a good team as football as a sport moved across the nation. For example, the Western Conference, started in 1896, was a forerunner to the Big Ten. It was largely comprised of teams now in the Big Ten, but they were considered Western because football wasn't prevalent or widespread yet in places like California or Washington. Cal had only just started playing football again in 1915, and Stanford wouldn't play football until 1919, both schools having dropped the sport in 1905 for rugby because of its violent nature. It would take many more years and the assistance of the Rose Bowl to get West Coast teams recognized as caliber teams. Teams in the South weren't recognized until the mid-1920s, again, because they weren't regularly beating anyone the powers that be recognized. That all changed in the 1926 Rose Bowl when Alabama beat Washington 20-19. To make a long story short, for Nebraska to be recognized as a national contender, they had to start beating Minnesota because Minnesota had already established themselves. Minnesota was recognized because they were coached by Dr. Henry Williams, a Yale alum, so the powerful people knew who he was. Williams was also known for his Minnesota shift offense, and because Williams was a member of the Rules Committee for a number of years. Nebraska began playing Minnesota in 1900 and played them every year up to 1913, beating them only twice. Once in 1902, when Bummy Booth's Nebraska team went undefeated and unscored upon, another potential national title claim, and in 1913, at which point Minnesota stopped playing Nebraska until 1919. Nebraska switched from playing Minnesota to playing Notre Dame, who had just begun to establish a name for themselves. Nebraska's first game in a series with Notre Dame begins in 1915, and then the two teams played every year until 1925, at which point they don't play again until 1947. Notre Dame in 1915 had begun to establish this reputation as they were starting to play teams across the nation. Nebraska in 1915 was coached by Ewald O. Stiehm, who went by the nickname Jumbo because of his 6'4" frame. Stiehm was born April 9th, 1886 in Johnson Creek, Wisconsin, and he attended Wisconsin where he lettered 3 seasons, excelling as a center in both football and basketball. He began his coaching career at Ripon College in Ripon, Wisconsin, where after a single season was snagged after a visit to Nebraska to become their coach. Stiehm had incredible success at Nebraska. In 1911, his first year, he goes 5-1-2, tying for first in the Missouri Valley Conference. In 1912, he goes 7-1, and in 1913, 1914, and 1915, he doesn't lose a single game, winning the Missouri Valley Conference each season. In 5 seasons at Nebraska, he wins the conference each season, and his record at Nebraska is overall 35-2-3, with a 14-0-1 record in the Missouri Valley Conference. His winning percentage is .913, and he is, by that percentage, the best coach in Nebraska school history. He leaves after the 1915 season. More on that later. Stiehm's teams are known as the Stiehm Rollers, and he not only has success in football, but in basketball. Nebraska wins the Missouri Valley Conference 3 out of his 4 years in which he coached basketball, with a record of 55 wins, 14 losses overall, and 33-4 in the conference. Nebraska's 1915 team is led by Berlin Guy Champ Chamberlain, a native of Blue Springs, Nebraska. Chamberlain played football as a halfback at Nebraska Wesleyan University in 1911 and 1912, then transferred to the University of Nebraska in 1913, and played halfback and end in 1914 and 15. He was a first-team All-American in 1915, and he was selected in 1936 as the greatest player in Nebraska football history. Chamberlain is enough of a personality that he deserves his own video. After college, he goes on to play professional football and becomes a head coach in the NFL in its early years, where he compiles a 58-16-7 record for a winning percentage of .759, the best of any coach in NFL history with over 50 wins. He is the only coach to ever win an NFL championship with 3 different clubs. All the newspaper articles spell his name with an A, his last name, and apparently his last name is spelled L-I-N at the end, which is just kind of a discrepancy I thought I'd point out. In 1915, Chamberlain played end, leading the team with 15 touchdowns. Remember that in 1915, the forward pass is not only legal, but it has become part of the offense for many teams. In his final game for Nebraska, he scored 4 touchdowns, including a 60-yard touchdown run in a 52-7 win over Iowa. And if that doesn't make you love the guy, pun intended, I don't know what else to tell you. Nebraska's 1915 schedule includes Kansas State, Iowa State, Kansas, and the aforementioned Iowa. It also includes some patsies. Then it includes the one team that gives it notoriety as Nebraska beats Notre Dame 20-19 on October 23rd in Lincoln. Nebraska finishes the season 8-0, outscoring their opponents 282-39. And by the end of 1915, Nebraska is on a 34-game unbeaten streak, and Guy Chamberlain becomes Nebraska's first All-American. The NCAA credits Cornell with the 1915 national championship. Cornell is in Ithaca, New York. The Big Red Machine, as they were known then, went 9-0, beating Harvard. I mean, they beat a bunch of other teams, but really they beat Harvard, and that kind of propels them above everybody else. They beat Michigan at Michigan 34-7, but Michigan finished 4-3-1 and wasn't that good that season. Most of the rest of their schedule is nondescript, but Harvard hadn't lost a game in 4 years. Pittsburgh finishes 8-0, beating Navy, Carlisle, Penn, and Penn State, all fairly weak teams, at least when you compare the win Cornell had against Harvard. Other undefeated teams in 1915 include Washington State went 7-0, more on them in a little bit. Washington under Gil Doby went 7-0, but didn't play Washington State because Doby would only play them at home. Oklahoma went 10-0 under Benny Owen, but the only strong opponent they played was 6-2 Kansas. Colorado State went 7-0, but played very weak teams in the Rocky Mountains. So why so many undefeated teams? Well, football in 1915 was very regional. There were no airplanes to carry teams around the nation quickly, so teams tended to play in their local area, which led to a lot of teams playing very outmatched opponents. 1915 could be considered the year that college football first went national, as there were a number of games played between teams on the West Coast or in the far west and teams east of the Mississippi. Here's the key as to why Nebraska did not win the national title in 1915. They needed more name recognition at the time, but they could have gotten it had they done this one thing, this one big trick. The Rose Bowl was known at the time as the East-West Tournament game. Now, the first East-West Tournament game had been played in 1902 between Fielding Yost's score-a-minute Michigan team and Stanford. Michigan won 49-0 in a game where the Stanford captain, so it's said, elected to end the game with 8 minutes left because he said his team was too exhausted to carry on. And it was such a fiasco that the Rose Bowl, we'll just call it the Rose Bowl from now on, wasn't played again until January 1st, 1916. Now, Nebraska is invited to the Rose Bowl at the end of the 1915 season. The key to the Rose Bowl at that time is that it's the only postseason game in existence. It's the only, quote, bowl game, unquote. So the entire nation of college football fans would have been paying attention to that game. And think about if Nebraska gets invited, how much more exposure that would be. But the powers that be, the faculty board, decides that it costs too much money to send a team to the West Coast and play in the Rose Bowl. What ends up happening is Washington State ends up beating Brown, who wasn't that good, and therefore Washington State ends up undefeated, and they too could claim a national title if we're looking at that. If you think about it, Nebraska would have gone to the West Coast as an undefeated Western team, air quotes, and played an undefeated real West Coast team, and it would have been hard to deny that Nebraska, having beaten Notre Dame as one of the top teams in the nation and beaten an undefeated West Coast team, probably would have deserved the national title as recognized, well, by people who recognize national titles. So there's that. Now, the other terrible thing that happens at the end of the 1915 season is that Jumbo Stiehm decides to leave and go to Indiana. And the reason he goes to Indiana is because Nebraska won't give him a raise. Stiehm is already a little ticked off because they voted down or they wouldn't allow him to go play in the Rose Bowl. And he knows that in order for him to gain national prominence, Nebraska has to play a game like that. So Stiehm's contract in 1912 was $2,000. In 1915, it was $3,500, and Jumbo said he would remain for $4,250 a year. From the book 50 Years of Football, a condensed history of the game at the University of Nebraska by Frederick Ware and published by the Omaha World Herald in 1940, comes this. "That's too much to pay a coach. Why? It's more than we make," protested the professors and instructors. "The university can't do that." The Athletic Association contemplated the $35,000 in receipts for 1915 and thought that the association could do it easily enough. Stiehm's salary had been partly paid by the association, partly by the regents. Still, the Dons complained. Lincoln businessmen offered to guarantee the increase, but no matter whence the money came, Stiehm would be paid too much. The faculty was certain of that, so Stiehm departed. In a nutshell, from 1912 to 1915, Nebraska had a coach that set them up to be nationally recognized, possibly as nationally recognized as Notre Dame was throughout the 1920s. Nebraska did not achieve that recognition for, well, you could argue until Bob Devaney came along in 1962. They probably could have had that recognition had they decided to spend the money to go to the Rose Bowl and kept Stiehm as a head coach because he probably would have stayed at Nebraska and set Nebraska up to be one of the best teams in the nation for years to come. Now, there is a very tragic ending to this. Stiehm goes to Indiana, and he doesn't have nearly the success going 20-18-1 over 6 years. He goes 5-10-1 in what would later be the Big Ten. Sadly, he dies on August 18th, 1923, at the age of 37 of stomach cancer. Now, who knows what would happen if he had stayed at Nebraska? And if you want to get angry about decisions that were made over 100 years ago, I think this is something you could get angry about if you're a Nebraska fan. Now, there is one issue that we need to touch upon, and that is this concept of claimed national titles. If you go out and look, Alabama claims the most national titles of anyone in college football with 18. The NCAA recognizes only 16 of those. The NCAA does not recognize 1934 or 1941, as both of those years the NCAA recognizes Minnesota as the national champion. Michigan claims 12 national titles, the most recent obviously coming in 2023, but they claim 1932 and the NCAA recognizes USC as the 1932 national title winner. Iowa claims 5 national titles, but the NCAA only recognizes 1 in 1958. And then there's Tennessee, who claims 6 national titles, but the NCAA only recognizes 2 in 1951 and 1998. Penn State under Joe Paterno had 4 undefeated seasons in which they did not win a national title. The NCAA recognizes Penn State with 3 national titles, but they claim only 2 themselves. They do not claim 1911. They do claim 1982, and I will show my bias for just one moment that there's this McCluskey's Corner ending in 1982 that's pretty iffy. And if you look at that as pure cheating, which it was, 1982 could be another national title that Nebraska could claim. Then there is Ohio State, who claims 8 national titles, and they are recognized with 8 national titles by the NCAA. I could go in depth and compare all of these, but I think that this video is getting long enough. Did you know there are 25 different national title trophies throughout history? There are 22 different math-based national title awards. And there has been 13 different poll systems. Now, when you look at the claimed versus who is actually recognized as a national title holder, there is a lot of claiming going on that is not necessarily deserved. Now, you could argue it is because those teams were undefeated, and if that is the case, in a lot of ways, we're just giving out participation trophies. So the question I started with, should Nebraska claim the 1915 national title? Well, Nebraska, do you want to be more like Alabama, Michigan, Tennessee, or God help you, Iowa, and just claim championships? Or would you rather be more conservative like Penn State and Ohio State? Now, one interesting side effect of claiming 1915 as a title might be that Nebraskans would pay more attention to their early history. That obviously doesn't matter as much as current events, but it'd be nice to see Guy Chamberlain's name be mentioned once in a while, along with Jumbo Stiehm or Ed Weir or Bobby Reynolds, all names that are pretty much forgotten, and that's too bad. The 1915 team was one of the best in Nebraska's history. Perhaps it's time to give them due. Perhaps it might make for fun off-season discussions. But in any case, it's certainly a good story to be told. There are many more college football stories to tell, and I plan on doing so on this channel. I hope you like them, and I hope you subscribe and stay tuned for more. Hit the notification icon, the little bell, so you get notified when I publish a new video, because I really don't stick to much of a schedule. Please share these videos with your friends who might be interested in either history or college football so that this channel can grow. This is Jon Johnston with Hardcore College Football History. Thank you.